This is Devin-Rose with a little teaching demo for middle school ELA. Now I would concentrate this lesson on annotations. So the learning objectives for the lesson, I will be able to annotate, and by annotate we mean know what matters in text, be able to tell someone why it matters, and check that the scholar is using strong quotes. Now before we begin the lessons, students would complete a little bell work, and this would be a picture study, just displaying a picture with the text, what do you notice, how does it make you feel, and then why. This is going to prime them to be able to notice and to kind of open up a discussion. So in order to begin, we would be able to all have this. I would do this on the board, students would follow along. I choose a strong reader to read out our passage, just to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we don't have anybody falling behind because maybe they read slower, and it gives a little bit more interaction than if I was to read it. So we would read the first paragraph, and I would ask them to have a 5-word summary, and I would actually be able to count on my fingers, did they use 5 words or fewer. So for our first paragraph of The Outsiders, we might say that we are introduced to the main character. We'd all write that down together, and I would ask them, so what? Why does this matter? What does it let us know about the character, or what does it let us know about what's important in this story? And we would go through line by line and be able to maybe parse through a little bit of what they think about the text. So one of the things that they might get out of it is that the main character compares herself to others. We might have a discussion about this. I might say that he's a little bit of a realist. And then we would go through and read a little bit more to try to prove this fact. So in order to do this, I would demonstrate a very weak quote in the previous lesson, and then we would demonstrate with a very strong quote. So we would say that we're on page 1, and then we would be able to determine the paragraph, and we would just be looking at the first paragraph for right now. And again, looking line by line, we would read through and say, well, if you had no other context and you just heard someone say this, what would you think about them? Would it allow you to show that this person compares themselves to others? So we might use this quote, he looks tough and I don't. So I would encourage a scholar to do it that way, just the first bit, he looks, and then the last line, and I don't. That lets them write quickly, and it also would then allow them to refer back to page 1, the appropriate paragraph, and then know exactly what they're looking for and where to stop. We would continue on, we might find another quote there. I guess my own looks aren't so bad, we might say that. We'd be able to again check around, and we might continue with the third quote. We would really delve deep in trying to find the most amount of quotes and exploring whether or not it is a strong quote. So for example, if we had this quote, a weak quote, my hair is longer than a lot of boys wear theirs, squared off and back and long at the front and sides. We would pause there and we'd be able to talk about what does that quote actually say. If I was to hear that with no context, would it allow me to come to this conclusion? That's the conclusion that we've decided is important. That's the one that we need to show. So we would scrap that quote. We might say, for example, going to a stronger quote, I have to be content with what I have. We could continue on there. I would choose another reader, another strong reader to be able to continue. And we might come to the conclusion that our narrator is a bit of a loner and that he's also quite reflective. And we would look for quotes that have this as their end, what they're showing. So we might say, for example, that we're then on page 1, and then that's paragraph 3, and we might pull the quote, I like to watch movies undisturbed so I can get into them and live them with the actors. So we might say that would be a little bit of a reflective bit. And we'd be able to then move on to page 2. We might pull another quote from paragraph 1 there, kind of uncommon. We could also say, for example, thought I was the only one who did. We might say as well that this narrator is a little bit of an escapist. And we would then again ask why that might be, how that might come up later. So we might target that as something to come back to. And to show that it was an escapist, we might say, for example, the last quote on page 2 in paragraph 2 would be, I don't know which is best. So in order to keep track of this and to allow them to meet this learning target here of check that they're using strong quotes, what I would have the students do is they would cover up the first 2 columns, and I would read aloud all of the quotes, and I would read them one by one and ask them to write down, perhaps on a separate sheet of paper or in a think pair share, what kind of conclusion would you draw if you overheard someone saying this? And if the things that you can conclude are the same or similar to the things that we wrote in our so what column, you know that your quotes are strong. We would continue this for the rest of the lesson. If this was an introductory lesson particularly, we would peel it way back. We would go very, very slowly. And then at the end of it, we might look at about our so what and see if there are any things that keep repeating. We might come to the conclusion that we do see a lot of different repeating words that kind of fit together, and we would discuss this and label those with theme. Now we would pause there, we would simply prime them for the next lesson, and at the end of that lesson we would be able to do a little bit of a written reflection. What are the things that we learned? And in the next class we would start with another picture study, perhaps of different styles of rooms, and they would be able to tell me what is the common theme of this room. And again, that visual priming, having something very concrete to connect to the concept that we are trying to learn in our literature.